Snow kept falling heavier until it swallowed the street in white silence. I sat in the back of my own car, parked right outside Ryart's Prime, the restaurant built with my husband's fortune and my family's name. Yet here I was, locked in cold stillness, left to wait like an unwanted guest. My coat did nothing against the chill that crept through the leather seat and into my bones. I pressed my hands together for warmth, but they only trembled harder. The window was covered in frost, my breath clouding it in faint bursts, while just a few steps away golden light poured through tall glass doors. Inside, my son and his wife were laughing with friends, raising glasses of wine, celebrating in warmth and comfort while I sat outside in the freezing dark. The clock on the dashboard glowed like an enemy, every minute cutting deeper. More than 2 hours had passed since they told me to wait, their voices so casual, as if I were nothing more than a driver or a maid. Snowflakes struck the windshield in restless rhythm, each one a reminder of the world moving on without me. I shifted, my body stiff, my knees aching from the cold, but I stayed still. Pride held me in place, though shame pressed heavier with every passing moment. Through the blur of frost, I could see shadows moving inside, hands gesturing, faces smiling. No one thought to come out, not even to check if I was alive. I had been mother, hostess, protector of this family name, and now I was left to freeze on the curb like a forgotten relic. My lips parted to whisper words meant for no one, words swallowed by the silence of snow. The wind rattled the branches above, and I closed my eyes, feeling the sting of betrayal sharper than the winter air. Through the window, I saw Renee Satterfield, my daughter-in-law, glide toward the entrance as though she owned it. She was 38, wrapped in a white fur coat that brushed the marble steps, her chin lifted high in triumph. On her arm was her father, Robert Satterfield, 60 years old, a man with the posture of someone who had always been treated as important. Beside him walked his wife Linda, her pearls glowing against the black velvet of her gown, her smile stretched wide as if she had already claimed a kingdom. A step behind followed their son, Byron Satterfield, barely 30, tall and restless, his youth stamped in every careless stride. Together they looked like a procession, a family perfectly rehearsed, their laughter spilling into the frozen night as though no sorrow could ever touch them. The doors opened wider and their figures were swallowed by chandeliers and polished floors. Inside, champagne would be poured into tall glasses, crystal catching the light like stars, while waiters moved silently with trays of hors d'oeuvres. Candles flickered against walls lined with mirrors, reflecting the glitter of silk and jewelry. I could almost hear the ringing of silverware, the chorus of cheerful voices rising in waves. It was the kind of feast meant to impress society, and I had once been the woman everyone turned to in such a setting. Now I was not even allowed through the door. Snow kept falling on me, a steady weight across my shoulders, collecting in my hair, seeping cold into my skin. My coat clung damp against me, and each breath left my chest raw. I held myself tight, bones aching as if the cold were chiseling me away. Through the glass, I had to watch them vanish into warmth and welcome, the family that had replaced me at the table of my own legacy. My lips barely moved as I whispered into the storm that I would remember every step of their entrance, every smile, every burst of laughter that marked my exclusion. I remember the moment as if the wind itself carried it back to me, sharp as glass. When the Satterfields crossed the threshold, a young receptionist with kind eyes leaned forward and whispered, almost hesitant, asking if they should help bring the elderly lady from the car inside. For one breath I thought perhaps Grace still lived somewhere, that someone would speak for me. But then Renee's voice rang out, smooth as silk and twice as cold. She smiled, the kind of smile that could charm a crowd, and said gently enough for all nearby to hear that there was no need. Her mother-in-law suffered from severe Alzheimer's. She had no awareness of where she was. The words dropped into the air like frost, delicate yet devastating, sealing a door no key could open. A laugh flickered at the corner of her lips, as if pity and dismissal were one. I felt it from the car, as if the sound traveled through the walls and into my bones. In that instant I was no longer Kathleen Ryart, matriarch, mother, wife of a man who built empires. I became a ghost, stripped of dignity by a sentence uttered so casually. Alzheimer's. As if my silence came from emptiness rather than the weight of betrayal. As if my absence were not forced but natural, deserved. I pressed my hand against the cold glass, nails tapping in frustration, yet no one looked out to see me. The receptionist nodded, perhaps relieved, perhaps confused, and the family swept inside on waves of music and light. That single lie carried more power than a locked door. It erased me in front of strangers, reduced me to a burden, a shell, an excuse. My chest tightened, not from the cold but from the crushing knowledge that she had planned this humiliation. Each second after stretched long, filled with the echo of her words. They thought I could not hear. They believed I would not remember. But I did. They thought my mind was gone. But every word reached me sharp and clear. I sat in the cold, my body trembling, yet inside my thoughts burned steady. Renee's lie still echoed, but I clutched it like evidence, not shame. They believed I was a ghost of myself, too frail to resist, too confused to remember. What they did not know was that I had prepared for this night. Sewn inside the lining of my coat, almost weightless, was a tiny camera, its red light hidden beneath the fur trim. Each sneer, each cruel smile, each careless word spoken in the glow of chandeliers would be recorded. I was not trapped in silence. I was gathering proof. I lowered my eyes so no one would see the spark still alive within them. Let them laugh, let them toast to my absence, for the game had only just begun, and this time the stage would belong to me. I leaned back against the cold seat and let memory unfold like pages I had read too many times. My husband, Edward Ryart, had been a man of vision, a builder of fortunes, a businessman who turned steel and shipping into an empire. When he passed, he left behind not only the family company, but also a trust valued in the hundreds of millions. That trust was meant to protect me, to secure the future, to stand as a monument to his life's work. Yet within its elegant clauses lay a shadow. I knew every word by heart. If I were ever judged incompetent, if my mind faltered through illness or the fog of Alzheimer's, guardianship of the trust would shift to the next heir. On paper, it was safety, a safeguard so that no chaos would swallow the business or its fortune. But in reality, it was a door left unlocked, a clause waiting to be twisted. I remembered Edward's voice in his study, calm yet firm, telling me this was only precaution, that he trusted me to endure. Still, I had seen the hunger in Renee's eyes long before tonight, the way she lingered over documents, the way her family whispered about inheritance as if I were already gone. Snow pressed harder against the glass, drawing me back to the present, but the truth of the past anchored me. They were not only celebrating inside, they were waiting, circling, ready to declare me unfit so the trust would fall into their hands. That was why her lie tonight had been so precise. It was not careless cruelty, it was strategy, sharpened and deliberate. My thoughts drifted to Stephen, my only son, the one thread that still bound me to the heart of this family. At 40, he now sat in the chair his father once occupied, carrying the title of chief executive with shoulders not built for battle. Stephen had always been gentle, a boy who believed kindness could mend everything, a man who thought loyalty was a shield strong enough to weather storms. I had loved him for that tenderness, yet in the world of steel contracts and boardroom predators, tenderness was weakness sharpened into a weapon by others. I had watched him enter meetings with faith in promises, shaking hands that were already poised to betray. Renee had seen it too. She had wrapped her smile around him like velvet, her whispers painting herself as indispensable. He adored her, loved her with the blind devotion of a man who thought marriage meant trust without question. That love was the chink in his armor, the opening she slipped through. He signed papers because she said they were harmless, attended parties she insisted were necessary, ignored my quiet warnings because he feared appearing disloyal. The very traits that made him a good son turned him into a vulnerable husband. I remembered evenings when he would sit by my side, voice tired, confessing his doubt about whether he was strong enough to lead. I would take his hand, remind him of the blood he carried, the legacy built before him. But then Renee would arrive, laughing, brushing away his doubts with promises of her guidance. I would see him straighten again, believing her version of strength instead of his own. My heart ached with both pride and despair. He was still my child, still the boy who once ran across the garden chasing fireflies. Yet now he stood at the helm of an empire without knowing the ship had already been steered by another hand. Renee had always known how to step into a room and make it hers. On the surface, she was flawless, the daughter-in-law any mother should be proud to claim. 38, educated in private schools, her diction polished, her manners delicate, her wardrobe a showcase of quiet elegance. People saw her as refined, capable, the kind of woman who could steady a man like Stephen. I had once tried to believe that image, to tell myself my son had chosen well. But shadows do not vanish, they only wait behind the light. The Satterfield name carried stains few remembered, stains scrubbed away by expensive lawyers and carefully written press releases. Years ago, Rubert had been whispered about in circles of finance, his ventures tied to credit schemes that ruined small families, his signature linked to companies that folded overnight after siphoning funds. Linda had smiled beside him through it all, shielding the family with her charm while debts were paid in silence by those left broken. Their son Byron had grown up among that chaos, learning that appearances could mask ruin as long as the right people were entertained. Renee had mastered that lesson best. She wove a perfect mask, cultivated friends in high places, presented herself as a woman above reproach. Few knew of the lawsuits buried in archives, the settlements reached quietly, the accusations of fraud dismissed not for lack of truth, but for lack of proof. When she married Stephen, she stepped into a world wealthier and cleaner than her own, and she guarded that new image like a crown. To him she was devoted, to society she was dazzling. To me she was a warning dressed in silk. I kept silent at first, hoping her past would not poison our bloodline, but I had seen enough to know better. The glitter she wore was not light, it was camouflage, and behind it still beat the heart of a woman raised in a house where lies were taught as survival. I had felt the shift long before tonight, the way Renee's eyes lingered on documents, the way whispers about guardianship circled my absence. That was when I decided to move first. If they wanted to believe my mind was fading, then I would give them a show so convincing they would lower their guard. I began to confuse names at family dinners, calling Stephen by his father's name, forgetting birthdays I had never once overlooked. I let appointments slip away, allowed my keys to fall from my purse in crowded rooms, smiled apologetically as if ashamed of decline. The more I performed, the more pity I saw in strangers' eyes, and the more certain Renee grew that her story of my illness would be believed. I signed over small powers of attorney to Stephen, watching him accept the responsibility with gratitude, unaware of the trap it carried. He thought he was protecting me, shielding me from the burden of business, while in truth I was observing, studying every move. From my quiet seat I saw how quickly Renee stepped into the spaces I vacated. She would whisper to him, touch his arm lightly, assure him she could handle details he did not understand. Papers appeared before him, contracts dressed as harmless, and he would sign because love told him to trust her. Each act of mine was calculated, each forgotten word a deliberate stone laid on the path I needed them to walk. I let them think victory was near, that the empire Edward built was sliding into their hands. But behind the fog of my false confusion, my mind was sharp, recording every instance, every manipulation, every proof of betrayal. The stage was set, and I was both actress and witness. Waiting for the curtain to rise from the shadow of the car, I watched the spectacle unfold as though I were a stranger peering into someone else's kingdom. Inside Reigart's Prime, the restaurant Edward had poured 65 million into, the Satterfields carried themselves like crowned hosts. Waiters hurried under Renee's gaze, arms heavy with bottles of rare vintages uncorked as if cost meant nothing. I caught the shimmer of gold-rimmed glasses raised high, each one bought with the fortune I had built beside my husband. Musicians stood at the corner of the hall, strings and piano filling the air with melodies tailored for royalty. Guests arrived laughing, welcomed not by me, the matriarch, but by Renee's voice, her hand outstretched as if she owned the marble beneath her feet. Stephen sat among them, my son, his face calm, even proud. He believed this excess was clever investment, a way for his wife and her family to strengthen ties, to build bridges in business. I could read the thoughts in his eyes, that these displays would pay dividends in alliances. He did not see the trap, that each performance was another step in erasing me. He nodded politely, clapped when the music swelled, and remained silent, convinced he was supporting something greater than himself. Outside, snow fell heavier, pressing onto my shoulders until I shook with both cold and fury. My hands curled into fists against my lap, nails biting through gloves. Every flicker of candlelight on gold, every careless laugh within those walls, belonged to me. The chandeliers above had been chosen by my hand, the wine cellars stocked by my command, the very stone of the floor laid with my approval. And yet there I sat, exiled, watching impostors drape themselves in my legacy, as though I had ceased to exist. It began with numbers, small at first, like hairline cracks in glass that only I seemed to notice. The company reports arrived each quarter, neat folders placed before me as though I were too frail to open them. But I did. I traced each column, each line of expense, and the pattern revealed itself. The operating fund was draining faster than logic allowed. Contracts had been signed without the usual review, stamped hurriedly as if time itself demanded recklessness. And there were entries labeled consultation fees, sums that bled millions with no names attached, no work delivered. My chest tightened as I turned each page, the evidence whispering louder than any voice. I called Stephen to me, hoping my son would look me in the eye with truth. He came, shoulders bent, hands restless. I asked him about the gaps, about the strange expenses, about why the accounts no longer balanced as his father had taught him. His reply was halting, words broken, his gaze sliding away. "Renee is helping me manage it," he murmured, as though the phrase itself were a shield strong enough to end all questions. The silence that followed weighed more than his answer. I studied his face, the boy I had raised now a man caught between love and duty. I saw the hesitation, the fear of disappointing his wife stronger than the fear of betraying his mother. That was when suspicion hardened into certainty. Renee's hand was not only on his arm at dinners, not only whispering at his side, it was in the contracts, in the ledgers, in the very veins of the company my husband built. Snow drifted past the window as I folded the report closed, my heart steady but heavy. They believed I was losing my memory, yet here I was, holding every detail like a blade. I knew suspicion alone could not win this war, so I turned to someone who lived in the language of numbers. Quietly, without telling Stephen, I hired Monica Singh, a forensic accountant with a reputation for finding what others buried deep. She came to me with sharp eyes and a steady voice, promising nothing but truth. For weeks, she sifted through ledgers and electronic trails, unraveling the knots of transactions that at first glance looked ordinary. Then she placed the report before me, each page carrying the weight of revelation. There was a pattern, subtle but deliberate, repeating month after month. Funds were drawn from the company accounts under the guise of consulting fees and vendor payments, small enough individually to slip beneath scrutiny, but together amounting to millions. The money did not stop there. It traveled through layers of shell accounts, each one designed to confuse, bouncing across jurisdictions until it rested safely offshore. And there, shining like a signature carved in betrayal, was the final destination, an account in the Cayman Islands. I leaned closer as Monica tapped the page, her finger steady on the name of the account holder. Byron Satterfield, the younger brother, the one who smiled too easily, who drank champagne as though it were water, who had grown fat on the illusion of family success. My chest tightened with both rage and grim satisfaction. Renee's family had not only draped themselves in my legacy, they were stealing it piece by piece, laundering the lifeblood of the company into their own hidden vault. When I placed the report on the table before Stephen, I hoped to see the fire of his father in his eyes, some spark of doubt that might pierce the veil Renee had wrapped around him. Instead, he looked down at the pages, his brow furrowing not with suspicion but with discomfort, as if the numbers themselves were indecent gossip. "Mother," he said softly, "Renee studied management. She only wants to help." His voice carried a plea, not for truth, but for me to stop questioning the woman he adored. I felt the words strike me harder than the cold outside. I watched him defend her, his shoulders stiff, his jaw set, his loyalty shining brighter than reason. This was my son, the boy I had held through sleepless nights, the man I had prayed would carry Edward's empire forward with pride. Yet now his greatest virtue, his faith in love, had become the very door through which betrayal entered. Each time he shielded Renee, he locked me further out, and I could almost feel the walls of the company tilting away from my reach. My heart tightened as I searched his face. He was not cruel, not blind, simply trapped in the net of his devotion. To fight him directly would break him, and to accuse her openly would only drive him deeper into her arms. The realization cut through me with bitter clarity. If I wanted to save him, if I wanted to protect what Edward built, I had to remain silent. I had to keep wearing the mask of a failing mind, to let them think I was too far gone to interfere. So I nodded faintly, letting my eyes cloud, my voice trail off as though confusion had claimed me. Inside, though, I sharpened my resolve. Their arrogance would grow with each lie they told, and when the time came, I would be ready. The envelope arrived one morning, slipped under my study door by a messenger I did not know. I waited until I was alone before tearing it open, my fingers cold not from the weather, but from the weight of what I expected. Inside lay a set of still frames, grainy yet undeniable, each one sharper than a knife. There was Renee, my daughter-in-law, sliding into the back seat of a dark sedan after what looked like a private meeting. And there, seated beside her, was Robert Satterfield, her father. For a moment I thought it was an embrace of comfort, some display of family affection, but the next image stole the breath from my chest. Their mouths met in a kiss that lingered, not the love of father and daughter, but something twisted, secret, and vile. I pressed the photographs flat against the desk, my pulse thundering in my ears. The detective I had hired, cautious and discreet, had warned me I might see things I could never forget. He was right. This was not only betrayal of Stephen, not only theft of fortune. It was proof of a family bound together by sickness, by corruption that reached far deeper than financial crime. The scandal of their past suddenly seemed pale against this truth. I imagined Stephen's face if he ever saw these images, the shattering of his illusions, the collapse of his blind devotion. I wanted to shield him, yet I also knew the world needed to see what kind of darkness sought to control our name. They thought me powerless, senile, defeated. But with each piece of evidence, the tide turned. I gathered the photos back into their envelope, my hands steadier now, and locked them away with the other proofs. I found the message in a folder with a dozen others, each file a small hammer striking at the house we had built. The family chat log lay open on a printed page, names and timestamps neat as if they expected their words to be archived forever. Renee had typed a line that read like a cold instruction, concise and without remorse. "If we can put Kathleen in an Alzheimer home, the whole trust will be ours." The sentence sat on the paper like a verdict, and I felt the room tilt. They had not merely planned theft, they had planned my legal removal, a clean transfer of power disguised as care. I pressed my thumb to the margin where the timestamp ticked, picturing how casually they spoke about erasing a life. Messages around it suggested doctors to call, staff to persuade, a narrative to feed to anyone who asked why I was no longer fit. They chose language to make it believable, rehearsing lines to convince staff and judges, arranging witnesses and medical notes in advance. Renee and her parents wrote in the shorthand of people who trade in strategy, not affection. The words were clinical, almost bored, like instructions for moving furniture. My chest constricted, Yet beneath that a cold clarity settled, steadying my thoughts. They thought bureaucracy could be turned into a blade, official stamps making theft lawful. I pictured hearings, guardians assigned, the trust renamed under new signatures, my name reduced to an afterthought. Stephen would be asked to sign, to agree that his mother could not manage affairs, and he would do it because his faith in Renee was stronger than his suspicion. This message was the linchpin that tied deceit to law. I folded the page into my palm and felt trembling yield to resolve. Every plot they had hatched could be met with proof, recorded conversations, accounting trails, and the photographs the detective had sent me. I had thought exposure would crumble them. Now I knew exposure would be the instrument to reclaim control. The plan revealed by that single line showed their hubris, and hubris is fragile faced with patient countermeasures. I would not let bureaucracy become a tombstone for my rights. I would not let the trust fall into hands tainted by theft and worse. I would move with caution, patience, and the full force of every truth I had gathered. Monica came back one evening with a stack of papers that looked ordinary at first but carried a weight that froze me. She laid them on my desk, and I saw hospital logos, doctor names, and official stamps. At first glance they looked real, but when I read closer, my heart stopped. These were medical reports about me, reports that said my memory was failing fast, that I was no longer able to manage daily life, that I needed care. They painted me as a woman already lost to Alzheimer's. Yet I knew those dates. On those very days I had walked in the garden, reviewed accounts, spoken clearly with staff. On paper I was already gone, but in truth my mind was sharp. Monica showed me the flaws. The doctors' names were of men who had not seen me in years. The same phrases repeated across different files as if copied and pasted. The speed of the submissions was suspicious, too smooth to be natural. Someone had built a false history for me, a story crafted line by line to prove I was unfit. These papers were not just lies, they were tools. If accepted, they would activate the clause in the trust, shifting guardianship to Stephen and in turn to Renee. I ran my fingers over the pages, each word colder than the last. They wanted more than rumors, more than my staged forgetfulness. They wanted the law and the hospital to declare me incompetent, to lock me away in a nursing home while they took everything. I folded the reports carefully, feeling anger settle into calm strength. Their trick was clever, but I had seen it now. They thought forged papers would erase me, but soon those same papers would become proof of their crime. The weight of the forged reports pressed heavy on my chest, yet I did not storm into Stephen's office or shout my innocence to the board. I knew too well it would change nothing. My son's eyes were still clouded with love, his trust in Renee stronger than any warning I could give. If I accused her now, he would see only jealousy or confusion, the imagined bitterness of an aging mother clinging to control. He would not believe me, and worse, he might help them bury me faster. That truth cut deep, but it also guided me, so I chose silence. I folded every piece of evidence, locked it away, and let my days play out with the mask I had built. I stumbled at doorways, let names slip from my tongue, smiled vaguely when servants repeated questions as if I had not heard. In front of Stephen, I let my voice wander, my gaze drift, until he sighed with pity and told Renee to take care of me. Every time I acted, I felt the humiliation burn, but I swallowed it, because patience was my sharpest weapon now. At night, I sat alone, replaying every detail in my mind, the kiss in the car, the money trails to Cayman, the cold message in the chat. Each memory stoked the fire within me, a flame hidden under ash, waiting for its time. I whispered to Edward's portrait that I would not let his empire fall, that I would wear this disguise of weakness until their arrogance betrayed them fully. The longer they thought me powerless, the more carelessly they would write, speak, and steal. I knew the time had come to move carefully but firmly. With Monica's findings in hand, I turned to my lawyer, Livia Marcondes. I asked her to act quietly, and she prepared the first step, sending preservation of evidence letters. These went to the banks holding our accounts and to the auditors, warning them that no records could be destroyed or changed. That single move froze the financial trail exactly as it was, locking in every suspicious transfer tied to Stephen and Renee. The next step came through the court. Livia filed subpoenas, and soon they were signed and delivered. The orders required banks, galleries, and even luxury hotels to hand over detailed records of payments linked to the Satterfield family. Credit card bills, wire transfers, contracts for extravagant events, all of it had to be produced and placed into the legal record. What had once been hidden behind charm and secrecy would now appear in black and white, stamped with official seals. I watched from my study as Livia explained the process. Stephen thought I was frail, thought Renee was helping him. That illusion gave us the advantage. He never imagined his mother was securing every receipt, every ledger, every invoice. My silence was no longer weakness, it was strategy. With each letter and subpoena, the net drew tighter. I could feel the ground shift beneath them, even as they laughed in their stolen luxury. Yet money alone was not enough. I needed something that tied Renee herself to the crime, something she could not deny or blame on others. So I began the second stage of my plan. I played the role of the confused mother-in-law, shuffling papers in my study, sighing that I could no longer manage the signatures. I asked Renee for help, telling her sweetly that her hand was steadier than mine. She smiled, eager to prove herself, and took the pen without hesitation. What she did not know was that among the documents was a crafted contract, a supposed loan agreement with hidden clauses. Those clauses stated that she personally assumed responsibility for company debts, and by signing, she acknowledged control over transactions she had once claimed belonged to Stephen. When her name flowed across the page, in her own hand, I felt the weight of victory settle quietly. That signature was no longer an act of help, it was a confession of fraud, stamped in ink that no lawyer could erase. The plan took shape inside the very walls they believed belonged to them. I met quietly with Melody Moreno, the longtime manager of Ryart's Prime, a woman who remembered Edward with respect and me with loyalty. In her office, we spread out the ledgers of recent weeks, every bottle of vintage wine uncorked, every musician paid in cash, every glittering decoration ordered under Stephen's account but arranged by Renee's hand. Together we compiled them into a single monstrous invoice, a bill so large it could no longer be ignored. Melody's pen tapped the final total, her eyes meeting mine with steady resolve. When the Satterfields next raised their glasses, the truth of their excess would be served on paper heavier than any toast. But numbers alone were not enough. I needed the moment to pierce through Stephen's blind devotion, so I arranged for others to witness it. Officer Jimmy McNatt, who had followed our family's name through quieter scandals, agreed to wait just outside the restaurant. He carried not only his badge, but the authority to act the instant fraud touched daylight. Beside him would be Jesse Majors, a journalist with a reputation for tearing the mask off false empires. Their presence would turn the confrontation from a private quarrel into a public reckoning. I imagined the scene, the chandeliers blazing above, the laughter caught mid-air as Melody laid the invoice before them. Stephen's hand reaching for the bill, his eyes scanning line after line, realizing the debts were not investments, but indulgences. And when he turned to Renee for explanation, the doors would open, and the world would step in to see what I had carried in silence for too long. This would be the moment that lies ended, the moment my son could no longer deny who his wife truly was. Back to the present, the night of truth finally arrived. At exactly 8:47 p.m., the turning point struck. Snow was still falling hard, and I had been waiting in the car since 6:30, every minute carving humiliation deeper into my bones. The frost on the windows had turned thick, my breath barely able to clear a circle to see the golden lights of Ryart's Prime. Then the doors opened, spilling warmth into the night, and Stephen stepped out of the storm. His face was flushed red from the bitter wind, his hair dotted with flakes, his scarf trailing loose as if he had rushed straight from the airport. He had not been expected until the weekend, but his sudden return shattered every calculation the Satterfields had made. At 8:49, the car door swung open beside me, and his figure bent down into the cold. He pulled off his coat in one swift motion, the wool heavy with snow, and laid it over my shoulders. His voice broke as he spoke, low and hoarse. "Mother, how could they leave you sitting here like this for hours?" His words trembled with both disbelief and anger, carrying into the frozen night. Inside the restaurant, the clock struck 8:50. Through the doorway I saw Renee standing rigid, her smile fading into ash. She had counted on my silence, not his presence. Rubert's hand twitched at his cuff. Linda whispered something sharp. Byron shifted in his shoes. Their carefully rehearsed mask slipped in those few seconds, panic flickering across their faces. By 8:52, Stephen's eyes had swept from my trembling hands to the chandelier-lit hall where his in-laws feasted. Confusion gave way to fury. No explanation could undo what he had seen. His mother abandoned, freezing, while his wife and her family lived as though the empire was theirs. I drew his coat closer around me, my heart steady at last. Time itself had marked the moment when truth stepped out of hiding. In the glittering VIP room, the moment unfolded with cruel precision. The waiter approached their table carrying a thick folder, his steps hesitant as if he carried a burden too heavy for his arms. When he placed it before them and opened the cover, the number glared from the page like a silent thunderclap. $380,000, the total of weeks of feasts, rare wines, and musicians summoned like servants to their vanity. The air seemed to tighten as eyes darted toward one another. Renee was the first to break the silence. She drew in a delicate sigh, as though wearied by a burden not her own, then turned to the waiter with a smile trained from years of polished deceit. "My mother-in-law usually handles the expenses," she said sweetly, her tone light and graceful. "In our family she has always kept that habit." Her words slid across the table like silk, but the meaning was as sharp as steel. With a single sentence she pushed the mountain of debt onto my shoulders, erasing her own hand from every indulgence. I felt Stephen's gaze shift instantly, his breath quickening beside me. The red in his cheeks no longer came from the snow outside, but from anger rising inside. His jaw tightened, his fists curled, and when he looked at Renee, his eyes were dark with betrayal. He had heard the sentence clearly, the polite mask that disguised theft as tradition, deception as custom. I sat still, letting the weight of her performance hang in the air. My silence was no longer weakness, but a mirror. In that quiet, Stephen could see the truth unravel. His wife's elegance was a cloak, her smile a knife. The bill between us was more than paper. It was proof, undeniable, and it had found its mark. I rose slowly from my chair, the room falling into a hush so deep I could hear the chandeliers hum. My voice, when it came, was no longer frail but sharp enough to slice through every lie they had built. "If I am nothing more than a senile old woman," I said, "then how do I know the truth of your bloodlines? Rubert, Linda, and Byron are not family at all. You are a band of con artists who stitched together a false household to lure and deceive my son." The words landed heavy, echoing off the marble walls, and for the first time their perfect smiles cracked. At my signal, Livia Marcondes stepped forward, her briefcase already open. She laid documents across the table, each stamped with official seals. Birth records, civil registries, adoption forms that never existed, and certificates that proved one undeniable fact. None of them shared the bonds they claimed. The supposed parents were nothing more than partners in fraud. The supposed brother nothing more than an accomplice. Stephen's eyes widened, his breath catching as line after line of truth stripped away the facade he had trusted. Then Monica Singh, calm and steady, placed her files beside Livia's. Her presentation was clear and devastating. Wire transfers, shell companies layered across jurisdictions, and finally the account in the Cayman Islands under Byron's name. Millions had been siphoned from the company his father built, dressed up as consulting fees, washed clean and hidden offshore. She pointed to each flow of money with the precision of a surgeon, until there was no doubt left in the air. The silence that followed was suffocating. Renee's face drained of color, her lips parting without words. Rubert's hand shook against the table. Linda's eyes darted to the door, Byron's jaw clenched tight. And in that stillness, Stephen turned toward them, his expression torn between fury and disbelief. For the first time, he saw not in-laws but strangers, predators cloaked in the language of family. The crash of truth came louder than the music. At 9:05 p.m., the doors of the VIP room swung wide and Inspector Jimmy McNatt strode in with uniformed officers at his side. His voice carried with the weight of law as he announced charges of fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. The room froze, champagne glasses hovering mid-air, the chandeliers trembling with the silence that followed. Then the screen flickered alive, and before every eye appeared the hidden footage. Renee in the car, her lips pressed against Rubert's in a kiss no daughter should give. Gasps rippled through the guests. Another file appeared, the chat log with Renee's cold words, "If we put Kathleen in an Alzheimer home, the trust will be ours." The whispers turned into a roar, scandal unfolding in real time. Stephen's face drained of color, his body rigid as though struck. He looked at Renee, her hands trembling, her eyes wide, her mask shattering as truth drowned her. He turned then to me, and I placed my hand on his shoulder, steady and calm. My voice was quiet but strong. "I endured the cold, endured the humiliation, only so you could see this with your own eyes." By 9:10 p.m., the officers stepped forward, the gleam of handcuffs catching candlelight. Jimmy McNatt's tone was firm as he listed the indictment: conspiracy to defraud, identity forgery, international money laundering. He clasped steel around the wrists of Renee, Rubert, Linda, and Byron, one by one, their protests swallowed by the rising tide of whispers. Guests leaned closer, their curiosity sharpened, their eyes devouring the spectacle. Within minutes, the Satterfield name, once paraded as noble and refined, collapsed in front of chandeliers and velvet drapes. Their honor dissolved into dust, scattered by the murmurs of society that would carry the story far beyond these walls. And in the center of it all, I stood steady, my son beside me, as justice wrapped its chains around deceit. Renee collapsed to her knees on the marble floor, her sobs sharp enough to cut through the whispers of the crowd. Her hands clutched at Stephen's sleeve, her voice rising and breaking. "You have to believe me," she cried. "Everything I did was for us, for our future." The words rang hollow against the weight of evidence, echoing in the room heavy with judgment. Stephen stood rigid, his face turned away from her tear-streaked eyes. When he spoke, his voice cracked under the weight of betrayal. "You did not only deceive my mother," he said. "You deceived our love, our marriage, everything we built together." His words fell like stones, final and unanswerable. Beyond the glass doors, cameras flashed, reporters pressing forward as the story raced into the night. Headlines were already forming. "Fake family scam busted at 65M Ryart's restaurant." Photographers captured every frame: Renee's collapse, Rubert's scowl, Linda's pale face, Byron's defiance, and Stephen standing torn apart between fury and grief. The Satterfields were led out in chains, their carefully staged reputation shattered in the most public way possible. Stephen remained motionless, rooted to the spot, his eyes wet with tears he could not hold back. The man who had trusted too deeply now stood emptied, the world he thought secure unraveling before him. I stepped to his side, my hand resting gently on his shoulder. My voice was low, steady, the voice of a mother who had endured storms. "Money lost can be regained," I told him. "But if you lose clarity, if you surrender your judgment, that can never be restored." His arms wrapped around me then, sudden and desperate, his head pressed against my shoulder. For the first time since Edward's death, I felt my son truly see me, not as a frail woman slipping away, but as the mother who had carried the weight in silence so that he could finally wake to the truth. The restaurant fell into silence after the storm. The music stopped, the laughter gone, only half-emptied glasses and plates left behind like broken masks. Outside the windows, snow kept falling, soft and steady, the sound muffled against the glass as though the world itself was holding its breath. Stephen and I sat side by side at the long abandoned table. His eyes were wide, still lost in the shock of betrayal, and my own heart carried the heavy weight of the role I had played. I asked myself in the quiet of my mind. I pretended to lose memory. I bore humiliation, only so my son could see the truth with his own eyes. I kept the inheritance, yes, but can a mother call this victory when the price is her child's heartbreaking? He reached for my hand across the linen, his touch trembling, his voice low but sure. Mother, I was too naive, he said. I see it now. Wealth is nothing compared to clarity and to putting trust in the right place. The pain in his words cut me, yet it also soothed me, for it was no longer the voice of a blind man but of one who had woken. In that moment, I realized the battle was not about money, nor estates, nor companies. It was about his growth, about him stepping beyond illusion into strength. The legacy I had truly saved was not only the fortune, but the son who now understood its weight. My final thought came clear as a whisper rising into the stillness. Money can buy many things, but it cannot buy wisdom. I have protected my son, but true happiness, perhaps it still lies ahead. The call to you is simple. If this story made you think about the true value of motherhood, the wisdom of age, and the cost of greed, share it to remind others that wisdom never grows old.